The New York Giants start their 2-day mandatory minicamp on Tuesday. So let's take a look at some of the narratives surrounding that and determine what we should believe and what we still need to wait and see how it plays out. That's coming your way next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all of my written work. And as always, welcome on into my Blue Crew community members, my everydayers, my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code Locked On NFL to get $20 off your first purchase. All right, Giant fans, on today's show, the New York Giants start mandatory minicamp, a 2-day mandatory minicamp. They run it Tuesday and Wednesday. So I put together a list of narratives that have kind of floated around all spring regarding this team. And I'm just going to go through this list. I have about 7 or 8 on my little notepad here. And I'm just going to talk about them and kind of, sort out fact from fiction, if you will, on these narratives. So again, welcome on in. Let's get into it because we've got a lot to cover. All right. The first one is this idea that there is a quarterback competition that is in play. And I'm going to tell you right now, folks, there is no quarterback competition right now. Matter of fact, I don't think you can say there's any competition going on right now in the springtime. Head coach Brian Daboll has talked about the OTAs being a teaching camp. I fully expect the next 2 days, Tuesday and Wednesday, the mandatory minicamp will also be teaching. All right. Jobs will not be won or lost in the mandatory minicamp because there's no pads, there's no contact. Hence, it's not really true football. So this whole idea that there is a quarterback competition that is going to spill over into training camp, I don't see it. All right. I think, in all honesty, as long as Russell Wilson is healthy and is able to go out there and do everything that they need him to do, he's the starter. I mean, Brian Daboll has said it. Joe Schoen has said it. I don't know why this narrative that, there's a quarterback competition is going to come on for the summer, where this came from or why people still believe it. But until further notice, Russell Wilson is the starter. All right. There's not going to be a competition. They set up that quarterback room. As I've said before on the show, they've set it up so that Russell Wilson brings his experience. He gets everything set, calms down the offense, sets the table, if you will, for the future being Jaxson Dart. And then, when they eventually make the switch, whether it's this year or next year, they're doing it the right way. They're not forcing, Jaxson Dart, who I'm going to actually talk about in point 2, they're not forcing him to have to compete, because right now, the best way I can put it, Russell Wilson is like a grown adult. Jaxson Dart is like a small kid, and they're competing in a swimming match. And there's just no competition between an adult versus a small kid in a swimming match. It's just, Jaxson Dart's going to be good one day. He's going to become that quote unquote adult in the swimming match. He's not there yet. So there is no competition at quarterback. And, what about Jameis Winston, you ask? Jameis Winston was brought in here to be the backup. He's going to be the backup to Russell Wilson. If he is on the roster next year, he will be the backup to Jaxson Dart. It's that simple. All right. Now, speaking of Jaxson Dart, I can't remember if it was a Colorado website or whatnot, but I saw a headline, Jaxson Dart's terrible. Oh my gosh, the Giants have regret. They should have drafted Shedeur Sanders. Whoa. Let's pump the brakes here, all right? With all due respect to whoever wrote that article, number one, I don't believe that person has actually been in the OTAs, because I don't think that person covers the Giants. I think that person may cover Buffalo. the Colorado Buffaloes, I should say. And I was just like, what are we talking about here? Yes, has Jaxson Dart had an uneven spring where he's held the ball too long or he's made a few bad throws? Absolutely. But were we honestly expecting him to come in and look like the next Patrick Mahomes or the next Tom Brady in their prime? I mean, come on, guys. What are we talking about here? Jaxson Dart, yes, he's got things he needs to learn. He's got things to work on. And I know there's going to be people out there who compare him to what Shedeur Sanders is doing out in Cleveland. But can we put some perspective on top of this here? All right. There's no pass rush. There's no contact in the practice. All right. So when you hear about Jaxson Dart getting quote unquote sacked, remember the offensive line can't really block the incoming pass rush. So the other thing you got to remember, and I don't know, I'm not out in Cleveland. I don't know how Kevin Stefanski is running those practices. I know how the Giants are running their practice. All right. Brian Dable is throwing everything at Jaxson Dart to get him ready, including some unexpected stuff, whether that be a pass rush, whether that be a stunt, whatever the case may be. Brian Dable's throwing everything at this kid, and some of the things he's handling, some of the things he is not. So, you read that, oh gosh, Jaxson Dart threw 2 interceptions. Yeah, that's fact, but it's not a reason to panic, because anybody who was expecting Jaxson Dart to come in here and like I said, look like a future Hall of Famer, yeah, you were expecting a little too much. So no need, in my opinion, to panic over Jaxson Dart right now. He's going to be a good one. He's going to work on stuff. Very mature, very coachable from what I've seen. Doesn't make the same mistakes twice. Brian Dable is in his back pocket for just about every practice that I've been at, coaching him up, talking to him. You see Russell Wilson talking to the kid. You see Jameis Winston talking to him, Tommy DeVito. You see Shea Tierney, the quarterback's coach, Mike Kafka. They're all helping this kid out. So let's give him a chance to settle in. Let's give him a chance to, get a feel for the pro game. And he hasn't even experienced the speed yet of the pro game. That won't come until the preseason. So for those of you who are just, sitting there worrying, did the Giants make a mistake because they didn't draft Shedeur, or they didn't draft Tyler Shuck, or whoever you want to put in there, just pump the brakes. All right. Let's see what the next several months and weeks, actually it's next several weeks and then the months ahead, let's see what that all brings. I think Jaxson Dart's going to be okay. Okay. One other thing, speaking of being okay, Malik Nabers' toe. Now, I had a couple of people over the weekend send me messages through my Blue Crew community membership that I have here on the Locked On Giants podcast, information of which you can find in the show notes, by the way, asking me about Malik Nabers' toe and should we be worried about it, pointing out that, hey, he hasn't worked all spring. How could he have injured his toe? He played at the end of last year and he was fine. And now all of a sudden he has this injury. Did he have a setback? Folks, I don't know if he had any kind of setback. I don't know exactly what happened, but, do we really need to worry about Malik Nabers right now? I don't think we do. We know what he can do. We've seen what he can do in this offense. And while I'm sure he'd rather be out there practicing, I don't think this is as big of a deal with him missing practice as maybe if it were Jalen Hyatt missing practice, if you know what I mean. So I think that if there were a game to be played tomorrow, Malik Nabers would be in there. Why put the guy out there right now when it's a teaching camp, a learning camp? He can pick stuff up watching. All right. This is a case where maybe mental reps, you can actually work with mental reps. It's once you get to training camp, if Malik Nabers ends up on the PUP list, for example, and I don't think he will, but if he did, then I'd say you start to worry a little bit about that toe. But right now, having thought about it, I don't think it's a major concern at this point with Malik Nabers. I think he's going to be fine. He's going to be out there for summer. He's going to probably not play a whole lot in the preseason, but again, we know what he can do. We saw what he could do last year. Do you really need to have him prove anything else when he's basically got that wide receiver one job locked up? I don't think you do, but we'll see how the coaches take the approach. All right, coming up next, I got some more on the list. So please don't go anywhere. I'll have them for you right after this. Hey, Giant fans, there's nothing like the NBA playoffs. The intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their minds. It's the kind of atmosphere you must experience live, and this year's matchups are already delivering. If you want in, Game Time makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest playoff games. Prices on the app actually drop closer to tip-off, and with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Game Time is a total game changer. Game Time offers a wide variety of event tickets besides basketball. You can get tickets to FIFA World Cup matchups, MLB, WNBA, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. If you've never used Game Time, now's the perfect time to experience the ease and affordability the service has to offer. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Game Time, last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and coming up this week on Locked On Giants, mandatory minicamp Tuesday and Wednesday. I'll have daily reports for you. I'll get those done as quickly as I can and get those online for you. And then at the end of the week, we're going to kind of wrap up the spring. So we'll close out the week, this last week of spring football with just recaps and just observations, takeaways from everything that we in the media were allowed to see. So that's coming up here on Locked On Giants. So let's get back to today's show. Today's show, we're talking about Giant minicamp narratives, the mandatory minicamp starting tomorrow, Wednesday, and then that's it. And these are just a list of narratives that have kind of come out through bloggers, through conversation with fans, questions that people have. And I want to address them on this show because it kind of sets the stage for what we're going to see in the mandatory minicamp. All right. So this next one, this actually came up from the last OTA that we were at, which was OTA number 9. And that was the fact that Deonte Banks was sharing first team reps with Cordell Flott. And that immediately raised a few eyebrows. Some people were wondering, okay, is there a competition going on there? Is Banks maybe in danger of losing his job, despite the fact that everybody we have asked, whether it be players or head coach Brian Daboll, they have spoken highly of Deonte Banks and the effort that he has put in this spring. So here's my take on this, folks. I don't think it's a competition per se. I think Deonte Banks is going to be a starter along with Paul Sonadebo, a cornerback. What I think the Giants are doing is in getting Cordell Flott some snaps with the ones. You never know when there's going to be an injury, all right? So to exclusively have two guys playing the position because they can and not work some other guys in with the ones, the team's really not doing those guys or themselves for that matter a favor. So in other words, again, during the season, now all of a sudden, if there's an injury, let's say Deonte Banks can't go and Cordell Flott hasn't worked with the ones all spring long. Remember, there are new wrinkles being put in by defensive coordinator Shane Bowen because of the new personnel he has. So you want to give these guys an opportunity, especially now in the spring when you're experimenting with different looks and you're also kind of experimenting with different personnel groupings. You want to give them an opportunity to work with the ones because you never know when you're going to need to call on these guys. And you want them to be ready. And as we get closer to the season, the training camp reps, they're going to change a little bit. As we get a little closer, you're going to see the starters and the key reserves working in specific packages. You're not going to see as much maybe mixing and matching across the board at different positions. So this whole notion of there being a true competition between Banks and Flott, I'm not buying it. All right. Now, do I think that there's a side effect that can benefit this whole situation? Yes. Because if you're Deontay Banks and you see somebody getting starter snaps that you're supposed to be getting, you might say to yourself, what's going on here? Or, hey, how dare that guy try and take some of my snaps? I'm going to work harder and I'm going to make sure he doesn't get any of my snaps. So if that is the effect that this particular setup has, great. It's an added bonus as I see it. So it can't hurt even if there is the slightest bit of competition, but I don't think it is a true competition to where the job is up for grabs. All right. I know some people thought that maybe that was the case. I don't think that is the case. All right. The next thing, and I think this is probably the biggest storyline of the mandatory minicamp. It's basically been the biggest storyline, in my opinion, all spring long. And no, folks, it's not the offensive line. That's a big story, but not the biggest. The biggest storyline, in my opinion, is the pass rush, the pass defense. The addition of Abdul Carter. What does he allow Shane Bowen to do? How does the pass rush change? And moreover, how does it look? Now, let's start off with the changes. Abdul Carter can play outside linebacker. He can play off ball linebacker. He can even come up on the line if he needs to. I think I saw one play in the last OTA where he came up on the line. He can drop into coverage. He can do a lot of things. And when you have guys like Abdul Carter who can do a lot of things and do them at a high enough level, guess what? Now you can do a lot more. You can throw in a lot more wrinkles into your defense that maybe weren't there before. So just watching, Abdul Carter and the different ways he was lining up. Now, the last OTA we were at, Thibodeau did not practice for whatever the reason. Brian Burns did. But looking forward to seeing all three of those guys on the field more during these next 2 days, because just watching how they are deployed, what positions they're lining up at, whether they're doing stunts, who are they teaming up with? How's the offensive line, quote unquote, blocking these guys, even though they can't technically block them because it's no contact, they can, at least try and get in the way of these guys. So the pass rush, to me, that's the most exciting thing that I think we're going to see or be able to see, I should say, given the fact that, again, it's no contact, no pads. The pass rush, to me, is the biggest storyline for Giants this 2-day minicamp that's coming up. Okay, now, not to be forgotten, I mentioned the offensive line. That's a storyline as well. It always is every year. Until further notice, that offensive line is still a question mark. It is still a storyline. Now, in particular, you're not going to be able to tell a whole lot by watching the offensive line because, again, there's no pads, no contact. So if you see like the pass rush coming in and the offensive line, is giving up quote unquote sacks, you don't know if those sacks would have necessarily happened had the offensive linemen had their pads on, had been able to make contact. So you got to take that with a grain of salt. But that being said, the thing with the offensive line is who's playing where. And one observation, that I think we've talked about on this show, but I don't know if we've kind of driven the point home. Evan Neal has been working primarily with the first teams, when he's gotten those first team reps at left guard. Unless I missed it, I don't think I've seen him work yet at right guard. Now, second team, you see him move around a little bit. I don't think I've seen him, though, work a whole lot at right guard. So that has me wondering, okay, are they training him to work at left guard? Because remember, at Alabama, that's the position he played. I think it was in 2019, I want to say. And he did pretty well with the position. So when he came to the Giants, they moved him over to the right side. He's never really looked comfortable. So are they saying to themselves, okay, you know what? Let's put him back on the left side where he looked comfortable, had some success, and let's develop him there. Because that's going to be the easiest way to get this guy on the field. That's what I think they're doing. So I'm curious to see over these next 2 days, do they work Evan Neal on the right side at all at guard? My guess is no. Last time we were at the OTAs last Thursday, for OTA number 9, they had Jake Kubas working there, right? John Runyon Jr. had returned. He had been, they had kept him out for a little bit. He took some snaps with some team snaps at the left guard spot. So again, I go back to wondering if Evan Neal proves that he can make the conversion. Do they say, okay, you know what? We put you in at left guard. We move Runyon over to right guard. And, because Runyon, remember a few years ago, or last year, I should say, when he came, he spoke about how right guard was, more comfortable for him, I think it was. So you wonder if that's what they're going to do with their guards, if that's what they're envisioning. So the offensive line, again, who's playing where? Marcus Bowe, where is he playing? We've seen him at right tackle with the twos. I'm trying to think if we've seen him at left tackle. No, I don't think we've seen him at left tackle, because left tackle we've seen James Hudson, the third. Stone Forsythe has worked primarily at left tackle. So it looks like Marcus Bowe, they're kind of not cross-training, they're kind of training for that right tackle spot. And that's interesting because Jermaine Illuminor is in the final year of his contract this year. If they decide they want to move on for him, or if Jermaine decides he wants to move on, now you've got a guy in Marcus Bowe who they're trying to get ready, who can step in and potentially be the starter down the line. So just, again, to recap, the offensive line, who's playing where and what might be the logic behind it. And, at some point, I think during this mandatory mini camp, we're going to hear from the assistant coaches. And as I've said on yesterday's show, I'm going to make sure that that I get to Carmen Brasil, the offensive line coach, because I have some questions about the alignment and what they're doing there. And hopefully I'll be able to get some answers and share that with you when I do my mini camp reports. All right, coming up next, I've got a couple more on my list that I'll talk about. So please don't go anywhere. I'll have that for you right after this. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and I'm going through some of the narratives that have kind of popped up for the New York Giants over the spring as they get ready for mandatory minicamp. It starts Tuesday, runs Tuesday and Wednesday, and then that's it. We're done. We're done for the summer. Not we here at the Locked On Giants podcast, but football is done until we get to training camp late next month. So we'll continue our coverage here on Locked On Giants. We'll probably go to a little bit of a summer schedule for a couple weeks, but plenty still to talk about. So don't fret. I'll still be around. All right. I've got a couple more narratives that I want to talk about before we wrap up today's show. And this one is play caller. Now, the common theory is that the more Mike Kafka is on the radio, the more likely he's going to be the play caller. We've kind of seen that the first, 3 years of Brian Daboll's tenure here. Whoever was on the radio calling the plays for the duration of the spring ended up being the play caller. I have said, and I will continue to say, I do believe Kafka's going to do it. And the reason why I believe he's going to be the play caller, again, Jaxson Dart. Brian Daboll is spending a lot of time with Jaxson Dart on the field, okay? I can just imagine how much time he must be spending with the kid inside the building where we don't have access to. So it makes too much sense not to have Mike Kafka call the plays. After all, Kafka's working with Russell Wilson, who is a veteran, who's probably seen everything and done everything. And if he has to work with Jameis Winston, Winston is a veteran who is, again, seen it all, done it all. So it makes too much sense for Brian Daboll to not say, okay, hey, Mike, you call the plays for Winston and Wilson. But if we have to put Dart in there, maybe I get involved with the play calling. And remember, they're not, the plan, as I understand it, Dart's not going to get into a game right away. Now, at some point, will Dart pass Winston on the depth chart and become QB2, where maybe he gets some reps in a game if the situation presents itself, whether it be a blowout or a mop-up type of role? I could see that happening. But for the time being, As I said for the very first point, Russell Wilson is going to start as the quarterback, be the starting quarterback, unless he is injured and cannot do it for whatever reason. So the play caller, it just makes sense. Let Mike Kafka do it so that Dable has the time during the course of his day, because he's got a lot of things to do, so that he now has the time to work with Dart. He has the time, in addition, to also check in on the defense and special teams, areas which, as we all know, weren't very good last year, right? They weren't the biggest problems, but they were problems. So Dable going back to more of a CEO style coach role, I do believe that's the direction this is headed in. I would be surprised if if Dable decides come, next month, whenever training camp opens, if he decides, you know what, I'm going to do it. Don't see it happening. All right. The final narrative that I have, are the Giants better? Now, disclaimer, the spring football practices, as I've said before, no contact, there's no hitting, there's no tackling. So some of the fundamentals that are, shall we say, important to the game, we can't really gauge where this team stands. But if you look at the team on paper, they have a much better roster than they did last year. You go down every list, every position unit, and P.S., I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this exercise on upcoming shows for you. You can honestly say that every position group is better in terms of depth, in terms of experience, in terms of accomplishments than maybe it was last year. So the true test, obviously, is going to be when they put the pads on and when they start going up against other competition. Because as I've said before, you don't win trophies in the offseason for having the best offseason, for putting together the best roster that, on paper. But in terms of addressing the most dire needs at the end of last year, offensive line depth, check. Defensive backfield, check. Pass rush, check. All right. They've gone after their biggest weaknesses with additional talent. How it all comes together, that remains to be seen. Once we get to training camp, I think it's 5 days in, then the pads go on, and we'll be able to better ascertain just how far this roster is. But on paper, it is a better roster. There's going to be more competition. And, an interesting litmus test that I think is going to tell us just how good this roster really was is when they make the cuts down to 53 men, how many of the players that the Giants let go, how many of them land on other rosters, either through waivers or pickups or whatnot. In the past, if you look at the cuts the Giants have made, a lot of those guys aren't exactly snapped up. We'll see if that changes this year. And if it does, that'll tell you pretty much all you need to know about, the 90-man training camp roster that Joe Shane has assembled. So lots of football still to come. Again, mandatory minicamp Tuesday, Wednesday. I'll have shows for you. We'll have shows the rest of the week, actually. So do keep it here on the Locked On Giants podcast. That's going to do it for me for today. Hope you enjoyed the program. And again, thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And I will see you again tomorrow, Giants fans.